And welcome to the Research Works podcast, brought to you in association with Curtin University and the Healthy Strides Foundation. Your hosts are Dr. Dana Poole and Dr. Ashley Thornton, and together we will interview world-leading researchers in the area of child health to support your practice in being more evidence-based.
The team at the Research Works podcast acknowledges the traditional custodians of the land and waters on which we live and work. We pay our respects to all First Nations peoples, elders past and present, and would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we record this podcast each week, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation. We recognise their continued connection to this beautiful budja we call home.
Well, hello everyone. I'm so glad that you've decided to join us for another episode of the Research Works podcast.
Yes, and today's episode is a pretty special one. We have not just one but two guests with us today. We have a returning visitor in Ginny Paleg. Welcome back, Ginny.
Welcome, Ginny.
And we also are very privileged to have Dr. Diane Damiano joining us as well. We're so excited to have you on the show today, Diane. Welcome.
Hi, everyone.
I would have to say this is an absolute thrill for me. As you can probably see on my face, I'm so excited because today we have two people who have greatly influenced my career. They've been people who've gone before us and I wouldn't be here without them, and I think that's why it's so brilliant that we can share all this and have these discussions together. And today we'll be talking about an overall topic about how can we promote evidence-based practice in the field of physiotherapy, or as the Americans like to say, physical therapy. So we'll be drawing on the latest research in the area of cerebral palsy. So this is going to be a cracker.
I can't wait. It's going to be such a good conversation. But of course, before we get started, we need to tell everyone a little bit more about our guests today. Dr. Diane Damiano is the Clinical Centres Chief of the Neurorehabilitation and Biomechanics section within the Rehabilitation Medicine Department at the National Institutes of Health in Bethesda, Maryland. A physical therapist by training, Dr. Damiano holds a PhD in Research Methods and Biomechanics from the University of Virginia, a Master of Science in Physical Therapy from Duke University, and an undergraduate degree in Biological Sciences from Catholic University. Dr. Damiano's area of expertise is in the investigation of both existing and novel rehabilitation approaches in children with cerebral palsy.
And Ginny Paleg is a physiotherapist and earned her master's in PT at Emory University in Georgia and a doctorate in PT from the University of Maryland. She started her career at NIH and has worked for her local school system early intervention program for the past 18 years. Ginny has published content focused on power mobility, standing, supported stepping, hip health and hypertonia. Whew, it's a good one.
It sure is. You two have been incredibly busy.
What a career.
Absolutely. So that's the formal getting to know you both, but we, of course, on Research Works like to have an informal getting to know you as well. So our icebreaker question for today is, what is one thing you wished you knew at the start of your career that you know now? It's a tough one. It's a big one.
Who's going to go first? Ginny?
It is.
Yeah, you're looking. Diane, who's going to go for it? This is a deep thinking one.
Ginny's always a tough act to follow, but I'll let her go first.
All right, then. I think at the beginning, I thought there was only one way. And I thought that I always had to be right. And I always had to sort of be upfront. I'm a New Yorker. I rode the subway 3 hours each way to high school every day. So I'm sort of used to getting in the crowd and having my way. And I had wise people like Dr. Damiano guide me. I was really lucky that way to be like, no, you're good at this one thing. And I think from very early on, from my very first publication that Diane helped me get, and my first presentation at AACPDM that she coached me through, it was like, no, I think I didn't have the vocabulary then that I have now, but it's just the 4s and the 5s. And I'm just going to be about participation and engagement and assistive technology. And I'm just going to take this very narrow path. And that's what it's going to be. So I'm just so appreciative to all the people that have helped me along the way and my amazing research partners and mentors. And it's been a great ride.
Wow. That is cool. That is actually really hard to follow, Ginny. Oh, that's awesome. Diane, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, there's always a lot of content things I wish I had known, but I think, and I think this is still something I worry about, is I wish I had learned somewhere to learn how to be more convincing. And I certainly am. I'm very convinced myself about things,
Yeah.
but I have a really hard time convincing others, and I find that frustrating. I think it's part of it's because I'm quite emotional about when I talk about kids, and
Uh-huh.
I feel like you shouldn't mess with kids, and so I really try to stand up for them, and so I think but everything's a journey, right? And
Yeah.
I certainly couldn't have imagined. I was a young mother with 3 young children, married to a cardiac surgeon when I got my PhD, and I was just doing it because I really was interested in research. And then all of a sudden, like, I'm traveling the world and meeting people like Ginny and just having like such an amazing life that I would never have predicted, but it's been fantastic.
That is great. Oh, gosh.
I love that.
I don't feel like I can follow any of that.
I think for me, and it probably ties in a bit to what you were saying, Ginny, is that I wish I knew at the start that I don't have to do everything right now. That it's really important to do a really good job of one thing rather than trying to spread yourself across lots of different things, and you end up doing not a very good job of all of those things.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, that would have been good, but hey, hindsight is a wonderful thing, isn't it?
Yes.
I mean, I love that we can, when you think about, I look at the therapists that are out now with the knowledge that we currently have, and we're trying to teach them where it's at now. And they're just, when I look at where they are, they're far more advanced than where I was when I started. And I kind of go, well, that's the point. It's to kind of continuously build on each other. And for me, when I first came to the area, I was like, oh, should I go into the hospital system first? That feels like that's what I should do. I should be more generalist. And I felt so guilty for going straight into pediatrics. I'm like, oh, am I going to be, pigeonholed in that space? Is that going to be okay? And I'm so glad I did that, because it was, people sometimes just need to spend time in that area to develop it and grow and understand the field. And what that would mean is, now, 20 years later, you've had 20 years of industry experience, and you kind of get what the pulse is, and you can speak into it more. And but I wish I knew not to put myself under so much pressure back then, because back then I was like, oh, should I get out of community? Should I go straight back to the hospital? And I felt really bad about it. But it's okay. It's really okay. Yeah.
You made the right decision. Pediatrics is the best.
It absolutely is. I would not change it at all. At all. Yeah. And the same thing, like you said, being in the area now, it's an amazing community, and you get to meet incredible people. And so, it's just a great industry. Big advocate for it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Should we get into it?
I think so.
That was good. Okay. Well, let's start off really broadly, and let's talk about what evidence-based practice is first. Should we start there? Like, how can we define what evidence-based practice is?
So, the question is, we really just want to use the best science out there that related to the child's strengths, and be able to use that to make decisions about their care. And it's, I love the Sackett definition because it talks about individual patients. You're looking at this individual and you're trying to make the best decision for them. The issue with evidence, though, is that evidence isn't generated in a logical way. It's just people focus on something that's interested in them and they produce evidence on it. Yeah. We probably need a better way to produce evidence. So there's lots of holes in our evidence, right? And that's where I think it gets into the idea of evidence informed, that we can make some judgments and some guidelines, but we don't have the whole picture and all the data that we need. So we have to use different things, clinical judgment, previous experiences, and things like that to fill in those gaps.
And evidence isn't necessarily, it's not generated in a vacuum, is it? It's and the application of that evidence doesn't happen in a vacuum either. So there's lots of other contextual factors that are influencing what you do.
Absolutely right.
Yeah. So
and I think it's really hard right now because there's not a general way that people get trained in that. So like Dana, you mentioned that you went right into pediatrics. So when you did that, did you feel well versed in dystonia and spasticity and spinal muscular atrophy, did you get in there ready to go?
No, not at all.
So we weren't trained at all.
No.
And at least in America, I'm old. The only thing you could do was go take an 8-week Bobath course. Yeah. Otherwise, you didn't even know where to start, right? So even from the beginning basics in America, at least, we get certified, we get trained, we get a very generalized education. But when we want to go learn about something, we really have to seek it out on our own.
Yeah. It's so influenced, when you think about the first few years of being in the industry, it's influenced by who you meet and who will mentor you. And if you don't come across that person who can guide you in that direction, you can be steered in a very different direction. And it takes a while to then come back. But I just think back then, I wish I could go back and treat those kids back then with what I know now. I'm just so much better now. I've got more of an informed view, but accessing actual evidence, whatever that was at the time, I couldn't get a hold of that. So it was really, really challenging.
Right. I worked with Suzanne Campbell, and because I was at the University of North Carolina, and Suzanne Campbell was the person on the faculty of my first job, and I took all of her courses. You all know Suzanne Campbell, I hope. She's just a brilliant woman, but she was a PT who was also a neuroscientist, and I was just so excited to work with her. But then I assumed, though, that all pediatric PTs were like her, and I was so shocked, because that was my view. This is my first person, and she taught me how to do Brazeltons, Baileys. I mean, she just taught me sort of everything I knew on a higher level, and but then I found out that everybody wasn't like her. And, it was kind of earth-shattering.
Yeah, it's true.
It's funny, 'cause I was having a conversation with a friend the other day who's a physiotherapist, and her journey was very different to yours, Dana. She didn't go into pediatrics, but she ended up where she ended up as a grad physio. There wasn't a lot of support. There were no senior mentors, and she was really kind of thrown in the deep end. And I imagine for people who have that experience, finding the evidence and applying the evidence is really tricky. So can we just talk about practically what that looks like? How do you seek out and implement evidence?
Oh, good one.
At the beginning of my career, it was a lot of hit and miss. I remember when I was doing a column for Exceptional Parent magazine, and everybody was so excited about hyperbaric oxygen, and there was no evidence. So I did a case study. Bill Oppenheim put it on the website of AACPDM, and then I thought it was quite promising. And then the RCT came, and it wasn't promising. So I moved on.
Yeah. And
then I met Karen Pape, and nighttime electrical stim seemed so promising, and I was all in. I taught for her. I tried it, but then it didn't pan out. So I moved on. My doctoral dissertation, I included whole body vibration because, oh my gosh, I went to Germany. I met with Oliver Semler. I met with Rainier Blank. I was like, oh, this stuff is really cool.
Yeah.
But then it didn't pan out. So, I moved on. So I think that's so important about where you get your information and what you do when something that you thought was really cool doesn't pan out.
Gosh, I love that perspective.
Yeah, I was probably a little bit older than Ginny. So when I was first starting as a therapist, there was no evidence. And I would go, for example, I was working with kids with cystic fibrosis, and I wanted to do an aerobic training with them because I thought they need to do something to keep their lung capacity they have. And the orthopedic surgeon said that we were seeing them said, well, you can do it, but you have to show me the evidence first. And so it was question kept coming up like that. And I'm like, I'd go to the literature and thinking, okay. And then I would there is no evidence. And I got so frustrated. And so that's kind of what led me to do my PhD.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. And I guess it sounds like it's that curiosity is what drives it. But I love how you've both described, if you find something that didn't really work, you weren't attached to it personally. It was like, okay, well, let's find the next part. And that was part of that process. So I guess from that, what are some of the dangers or what are some of the risks if we don't want or we don't apply, evidence-based practice into what it is that we do? What are some of those things that we risk if we don't do that?
Yeah, I think the biggest risk is that patients don't get the best care. This is why we all do what we do, is to make sure that children have the best lives they can. And if we don't use evidence and then people think, well, I'm not doing anything that hurts them, but you are doing something. If you're doing something that's not helpful, you're wasting time, resources, time that could be spent either playing or doing something much more useful. So, I mean, I think the end of the day is that really we have to think of that patient and that family. And if, I always give the cancer example that, if someone has cancer, they go to the doctor and they want to do the latest, best thing. And rehab tends to have a sort of a slower time course and doesn't feel that urgency. But I feel that urgency. I feel like when I have this little child and I know their muscles are developing and their brains are developing, I want to get in there and do something as the best we can as soon as possible. I feel a lot of urgency because I know that affects their whole lives. And so I guess I'm surprised that people are more interested. I don't, and it's not in a fair one way, that they're more interested in sort of their journey and their beliefs and not really thinking, we're a medical profession. We're supposed to use the best science. That's our job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Gosh, that was well said.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It becomes like they connect themselves to the things that they're doing, and it almost becomes part of their identity, and it's hard to tease that apart, isn't it?
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, I think so. And they've invested a lot of training. They've invested money. They've invested a lot of time. Yeah. I think a lot of it's well-meaning, but I think you have to step out and, especially when you're getting pressure from the outside saying maybe what you're doing isn't supported by evidence. Yeah. I mean, before, when we didn't have evidence, we could do whatever we wanted because there was nobody really to say that doesn't work. Yeah. But now when you say, we don't think that works, or we think we have these other 10 things that work better, you have to be willing to re-examine and open yourself up to that.
Yeah. So let's talk.
And we've heard a story from Sweden where they're not funding certain things that are in the red, below the worth it line. Yeah. So if you write in your note that that's what you did, you won't get funded.
Yeah. Yeah. So
we thought that was kind of cool.
That is cool. Yeah.
A real line in the sand.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's talk about the current body of evidence when, in physio or physical therapy. We know that it's growing so much and it changes all the time and it's constantly evolving, which is so exciting. But that means keeping up can be a bit of a challenge. So what do we know now about evidence for physical therapy?
Yeah, I mean, it is hard to keep up. But I think, again, that's our job to keep up, to at least know, at least for the, we all have sort of our practices, or, we have certain things that we're doing in our practice or focusing on, like cerebral palsy. And what the literature's gotten actually quite easy to read because there's a lot of systematic reviews now. There's guideline development. So a lot of people are doing the work for you. I think like the work that you guys are doing to actually get the evidence out in a really much easier way that people like to learn with is a really wonderful idea. I feel like that's kind of the missing piece that we've kind of expected through osmosis. People figure out what the evidence is, but they don't. I mean, you have to sort of engage them and interest them and talk about hot topics and make it more appealing to learn, for sure.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the things I've noticed about, some of and I know we're going to talk about them in a bit more detail in a moment, but some of the new guidelines that have come out, those clinical guidelines and those systematic reviews, I think, credit to the teams that have put those together because they really do a great job of making that information easy to access and easy to understand for people who maybe don't have that research background. But it's all kind of laid out for you really clearly there to pick it up and run with it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I
just want to mention that it's not... And it's not just systematic reviews, because a classic systematic review is RCTs. So I think there's been methodology creep in that the scoping review for me is the go-to thing. Yeah. I'm publishing much more scoping reviews because I can look at all the lower level evidence, which is all that's there.
Yeah. Yeah. I think what I have been really noticing, and what you just said there really just really resonated with me, because yes, there is when you look at literature, there's a huge amount of literature. But when you are specializing in a particular area, and you know, this is my area. So like you said, it's mainly cerebral palsy, it's motor development. I'm a physiotherapist. I want to improve motor skills. Actually, that area of evidence has come in like from this big funnel. It's come right down now, and you can actually go, this is where I'm at. So if you are searching for more information, it's based on that lot of information. We're no longer looking at, you know, hundreds of articles being published. We're now just coming down, and there is this ability to sort of be more selective, and you can do now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, right.
But you also miss things. Like,
True.
I think it took me a year until I found your amazing article on overground versus treadmill training, which was something I believed in and already did, but I was waiting. There was one small article by Willoughby, but when yours came out, then I was all set. And I remember a story in San Antonio, Texas. I was sitting next to Diane at the APTA conference, and a woman got up to do her presentation, and she said, I have earth-shattering news for you. I am the first person ever to find out that exercise does not increase spasticity. And I look at Diane and I'm like, really? You're going to let that go? Like, it does so much more than that. Like, you've actually shown it does so much more. And she's like, you know, you got to start somewhere.
Yeah.
So again, she's kinder than I am, but that's the thing. I want infographics. I want a go-to website.
Yeah.
I want certification and evidence-informed practice for torticollis, for CP, for SMA. Like, how do you know somebody knows what they're doing? And where do you go when you're motivated, when you're curious, when you want to be good at what you're doing?
Yeah.
Where do I go for that information? Except for your podcast, of course, which is my go-to.
Yeah, I mean, Ginny has said, this is Ginny's suggestion, that we should have, I mean, I think the APTA, or American Physical Therapy Association, should have courses in evidence-based practice and get certified. Like, we did have like a pediatric specialty and stuff like that, but I think really, because therapists really want to know
They do. Yeah.
the big details, right? They really want to know this patient in front of them. What are some of the things that I can really do that you can visualize right away?
Yeah.
And I think that there's so many other certifications that people hang their hats on, but we don't have the competition. Science doesn't compete in the same way as these other things do.
No.
We're too like, oh, this might work. This has a small effect. You know, you might get a modest change.
Yeah.
I mean, we're too careful and not really getting the real message out there.
Yeah.
And I think what I finally decided is the real message. It sounds terrible, but it's like the real message is that if you really work hard and you really exert yourself and you do things in a certain way, in a science-based way, or, you know, according to biomechanics or exercise physiology principles, whatever you're trying to change, that you can make small incremental progress. And it's going to take years. It's going to take it's going to take a lot. And that message sounds like, it's like parents, or maybe people don't want to hear that, but it's like, if you want to be an Olympic athlete, you're going to start here and you're going to train and train and train and train and train. And you've got to train in the right ways. You're not going to get better.
Yep.
But it's going to be your hard work. And I think we don't like to give that message. We want to do something that's more of a quick fix, or an instant, or, you know, let's put oxygen in the brain, or let's zap muscles, or it's, you know, it can't be that easy. You know, nothing's that easy.
Yeah.
So I think we've kind of mislead people a little bit.
Yeah. I think what you've said is it's so true, because we are, as researchers, we are so used to saying things like, you know, it's a small effect, you know, we need further studies in this area, you know.
Yeah, we don't want to overstate things.
we don't. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. And
Exactly.
then we notice that if someone is maybe selling another kind of intervention that we don't know about, they're not grounded by science, they feel okay to say, like, there's amazing results. There's great things you can see. So if you were to come to it uninformed, because it's your first time coming to the area, and you hear us say, ooh, small effect, you know, more studies are needed, versus amazing effect, let's see what we can do. We're comparing two different things.
Yeah. The marketing department for research has a lot to answer for.
It does. And I've read something recently. They said they rewrite your genetic code. I'm like, you know, how can you claim something like, seriously, this is a therapy out there? I'm just like, what?
Yeah.
Like, how can you even say that with absolutely no evidence? But it's just, I mean, of course you want to believe these things. We all want to change the brain and do stuff, you know, and as a parent, you can see they're so vulnerable.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's hard. It's hard to see these things. You see an intervention that says we're strengthening. Yeah. And then Diane's like, yeah, but they're doing it at the end range and not in the middle. So that's not really effective. And you're like, oh, wow, I didn't realize that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, you just got to dial down to these little things. There's a test that an assessment that I used to use. And I always used to say it's valid and reliable. But then in publishing a study recently, we dug into it, and the validity and the reliability resorted the items and took some out and did some stuff. So the way people use it, it's actually not valid and reliable. That took me 20 years to figure out. So we don't all come to this easily. Yeah. We're all struggling. We're all learning and growing and trying to be the best version of ourselves that we can be and do the best job we can for families. And the best intervention is still just get out of the house, just go to the playground or get in the community. And
that's right. Yeah.
Go get engaged and participate and go have fun, because that's what kids are supposed to do. That's right. Get out of the clinic.
Yeah. I love it.
That's my take.
Yeah. I love it. So I guess this takes us to, knowledge translations. I'm going to go back to an article that you published, Diane, back in 2006. And I remember I found it maybe 3 or 4 years after that was published. And it was called Activity, Rethinking Our Physical Therapy Approach to Cerebral Palsy. And for me, that was transformative. And I looked at the date and I look at where we are now. And it's been about 17 years, which incidentally is what is often published as the knowledge translation, that gap from research to practice. So I'm kind of a little bit gobsmacked, because when I reread that paper, even just early this morning, I'm like, they're still so relevant right now, and they're the topics of conversation now. But I'm just really interested in why you wrote that article. What was it's a beautiful article. And for those who haven't read it, we'll put links for that so you can definitely go and have a look at it. But tell us a little bit about how that article came to be.
Yeah, so I went, the APTA has these conferences called STEP conferences. And the first one was New Step. And I went to 2-Step, which was in 2005, and was one of the speakers for the pediatrics section. And everybody was talking there. Everybody's talking about intensive therapies now. We were realizing we were under rehabbing people. But then I realized in pediatrics, we were talking about intensive stuff there too. And studies by Eva Bauer and other people would show that intensive therapy wasn't any better than less intensive. And then I started realizing, which I heard Ginny say recently, is that 0 times 100 is still 0, and if you do 0 times 30, 20 is still 0. And I realized that a lot of things we did in pediatrics were really still rotating kids with balls and doing very, very manipulative, very passive things. And I'm thinking, they just can't do practice. We need to make sure we're doing practicing the right things. And so my strength stuff sort of led into that. And then I was always very interested in physical fitness, and I did a lot with Jim Rimmer, who's a big physical fitness person for disabilities. And then realizing that physical activity does something for the body, but it also does something for the brain. And the brain and the body really are constantly interacting. That I realized that the whole issue is not practice. It's just, we just need to get these kids moving and out there and doing stuff. And that's really the key. And that message is still very strongly out there, that things have to be child initiated. They have to be effortful. The person has to want to do it. I mean, all the engagement has to be there. The principles are still there. And they're actually they're again, exercise physiology principles. They're very straightforward principles that somehow people some things are almost too basic, I think, sometimes, that people forget. And I started realizing people had forgotten about how to strengthen. People are now moving on to do other stuff and, using all these fancy devices that I actually like and do, but they kind of forget the basic principles of strengthening. So I've gone back and now doing more thinking about strengthening again and publishing some strengthening reviews and talking about that again, because I feel like people are sort of, again, missing sort of the underlying things that are important to keep yourself more active through the lifespan.
Yeah. And when we think about activity, when should we be implementing activity for children? Yeah, I mean, that's what you tell parents, when I work with babies, that you just want them, the kind of message I gave parents is that because kids with CP, it's hard for them to move. They don't really want to move. It's just not as reinforcing when it's harder. Just told them anytime they're just laying there doing nothing, it's time they're not developing their muscles, just get them upright, even if you're carrying them around, have them working on their heads,
do anything you can that they like doing that makes them move. So it starts from the very beginning. There's an article out that says that muscles and CP start changing at 15 months. And I've been kind of going nuts because I've seen everybody talk about that lately. Muscles at birth, at CP, are affected at birth. I mean, it just that it takes that long for them to diverge from other kids. Yeah. Muscles are waiting for input, and kids with CP, their muscles don't get that input. The brain's waiting too, and everything you can do to just give them more activity is a positive.
Gosh, that's good.
Yeah.
I remember just last year I was in a working group with the fabulous Dr. Norelle Moreau, and there was Rich Lieber in there too, and they were just talking about muscle and strengthening. And you do need to go down to that detail sometimes, because even after spending some time with them, I'm like, oh, this happens early. We do need to think about sarcomeres. We do need to think about, the difference between muscle strength and muscle power. And I remember Noelle even saying, she's like, I feel like the pendulum has swung so far to participation, which is where we want to be, but we've almost forgotten about strength training. So that's why she published that article last year, and it was good to get that in the forefront. And I suppose on that, and the importance of weight bearing and stress to the actual bones itself, they're good things. How early should we be starting things like supported stepping, particularly when we're thinking about, you spoke about kids who, it's hard for them to get up and move. So we are thinking about across the GMS, but what about the kids who we know are kind of headed towards, GMS level 4 and 5? Ginny, this is very you. I can see you nodding. When should we be starting to get them up and moving?
Heather Feldner has coined the term on time, capital O, capital N, hyphen, capital T. I asked, why did you choose those letters? And she said, alcohol. So I'm using the phrase on time. It doesn't really have a specific meaning in the wording, but it's about doing it when typical kids do it. So my grandson is 5 months old and he is sitting. We worked immediately on tracking. We got the colorful bands that I give my clients. Early sitting like Iona Novak and Kathy Morgan, 3 months old, who already, her friends are looking at her Instagram and like, what are you doing? Following my mom. He has a plagiocephaly helmet too. We get rid of that in 2 more weeks. We have to start that right away. There's no, in the NICU, when I worked in the NICU, we already started on showing the parents during kangaroo care how to do some tracking, some talking. So we're recommending you get up in a stander at 9 months because, again, Sean Williams tells me that's when she sees sarcopenia beginning. We're getting up in supported stepping and power mobility training and switch toy use right around that same time. Yeah. There's a lot going on at 9 months. Some people spread it a little out, especially with medically compromised kids, but that's when typical kids are doing those things. So we don't want to miss those windows of opportunity and neuroplasticity.
Yeah. And when you talk about that, Ginny, and congratulations on your grandson, by the way, that's very exciting. My mind goes to milestones and those things that, as parents, you kind of have those check boxes in your head of what a child, you think a child should be doing at certain points in time. Are those... I'm hearing from what you're saying that around those times that we might expect things to start happening is when we should be encouraging those things for our children with CP. Is that right? Like, what role do milestones have for these children?
I can't get hung up on every single thing. Like my grandson, he's not a roller. His father's a part-time baker, so he does all the rolling. So my grandson doesn't feel like he has to do it. And again, crawling. I think I published something 15 years ago that said, why are we so hung up on crawling? Like it's not a thing. My daughter works for Google. She never crawled. Like maybe it's a little bit of a cause and effect that a kid's body works a different way. So they decide to get around it. But my whole lesson from Peter Rosenbaum is I'm not going to fix it. Like I have to wear glasses. That's just, and you do too. That's just what we do. Yeah. So I don't get hung up on every single little thing. The main thing is to play and enjoy and bond and learn that you have an effect on your environment and the people around you, the social emotional stuff.
Yep.
Yeah. And babies do love movement. So, and I think again, you want to encourage parents to not be afraid to do stuff like Dale Ulrich, did a lot of the stuff with Down syndrome and has done some stuff in CP. He just tells everybody to support, like babies love to stand. Just do it.
Yeah.
Just do it when if the babies like it, just keep doing it. And then put them on their tummy and make it fun. I mean, just, these are things that we can be doing. And, parents play, movement's a lot of play and interacting. And you have a child with a physical disability, the more you can reinforce what they can do, the more exciting it is.
Yeah.
And, Ginny's really been a pioneer for helping children in GMFCS 4s and 5s and really, finding ways for them to be active, which is something we've neglected and just sort of struggled with for so long in therapy. And we know that the health risks of that group is so important. So the message is, you need to start early. And I'm reviewing a PhD thesis on frame running. It used to be called Race Runners, and it's all for GMSCS 4s and 5s. I'm just so excited about this work. It's work I wanted to do. I just don't have time to do everything.
Yeah.
And, calling people GMFCS 4s and 5s athletes. These are like highly trained. These people can make incredible gains through training. It's like, just seeing that power that these children are capable of that we're not even giving them the chance of.
Yeah.
I think parents, if they saw those visions of these kids like GMFCS 4s running down a track,
incredible.
It would change their perspective, right? And I think that's kind of the message that, it's going to take your whole life commitment if you want to do that stuff, but their health, it just is, it saves their lives because their health is better. And they're out in the world with their friends, they're competing, people are cheering for them, all the self-esteem. It's
brilliant.
It's so great.
Yeah.
So these are the things I think we need to, these are the kind of seeds I think if we plant in people's heads, I think it'd be much better.
Yeah. I love that.
And I love the idea that we're thinking about starting early. One of the things I have heard is people being a little bit worried about getting them upright because it just reinforces their extensor tone or their dystonia, and they all get stiffer because they're up. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't think there's any evidence that doing that makes them. You can't make anybody more dystonia. I know that's not what's causing those issues.
Yeah.
I think they do want to. Obviously, you want to pay attention to the muscles that aren't working as well because you want to keep things more balanced. But I think activity is more important than functional activity. Make it as fun and functional than worrying about that.
And we can know now what your GMFCS level is going to be approximately with some clarity at 3 to 5 months adjusted age. So you can make a decision there. Someone's going to be a 1 or a 2. You're going to focus on different things. But if I know you're most likely going to be a 4 or 5, then I don't know anything now to change your level. Right. So I don't think I'm going to. And if kids that do change level, they actually get worse. So I think we can only make them better. And that one of the shifts from the evidence is that we're not going to worry about fixing. We're not trying to make you normal. We're trying to integrate your reflexes. Like you are what you are, and we're going to make you the best person you can be.
Yeah.
Love that.
So cool.
So coming back to the evidence and talking about the traffic light system that was published by Iona Novak and her incredible team of researchers back in 2019, I think, first, and then there's been an update to that since then. There's some common themes in there about things that work, I suppose, those green light interventions. There's commonalities among those. Can we talk about those and what the evidence is and what the consistent evidence is across those?
Yeah.
We like the word ingredients.
Ingredients,
Yep.
Let's do that.
Yeah, they all involve specific training at a fairly intense level. It's all again the child initiated. They have to be the ones doing the activity, not something being done to them.
Yeah.
They have to learn their own sensory consequences, not having somebody manipulate their body to impose different sensory things. Some devices like locomotor training has been shown to be effective, which is different than the adult rehab. It's been more effective because I think people in pediatric rehab have used it in more challenging ways. So I think Obviously, overground is really important. We can't forget the more simple things. You don't want to help people too much, but if you have that principle that the work has to be done by the person, and anything that helps them do more work is a helpful device, not something that does it for them. So, I mean, I think that, the interesting thing, Roberta Shepherd, who's one of my favorite people from Australia, she years ago wrote about the principles of motor learning in stroke and then in CP. And everything that changes brain plasticity, everything that's in those green bubbles, basically they're all her principles. I mean, it's like we knew this stuff. This is, of course, the same thing that makes your body better changes your brain. This is how it works. Yeah. And, it's again, it's remarkable to me to see that we have so much knowledge that we don't use and we don't remember when it's right in front of us.
Yeah.
My biggest frustration is contrived situations. I see kids on saran wrap, on boards that go up and down, and it's not a real life, full task specific, context specific. And on one of your podcasts, I think it was Sarah, I can't remember, but she said, if I walk by your workstation and I can't immediately know what the goal is, then you broke it down too far.
Yeah.
Like it should be obvious.
Yeah. That's right.
Right. That's very good. Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess on that then, in terms of the ingredients that you can look at. So for, so any therapist that's evaluating something, those are great things to check through and go, is this more likely to be a green light intervention, something that's really worthwhile? What about on the other side in terms of the ingredients that are the commonalities for the red light interventions that were sort of identified in that traffic light system?
I mean, I think any of the passive, the Voita, for example, is so passive and imposed on people. I think that I don't really know enough about sensory integration, so I can't really comment on that. NDT, the traditional NDT, we're all very familiar with it. I think the issue there is that because that's such a powerful part of our profession, NDT was so dominant, and it's dominant all over the world, and it means different things all over the world, is that people have changed within that culture. They try to change it and they're trying to adapt it. But I think that the issue there is that it has a baggage to it. It means something, or means different things to different people right now. Yeah. But it means something. And even when we've tried to, even in the changed versions of it, it still is not, it's shown not to be effective. It doesn't do what the other things do. So that's where I'm saying that this is where you have to question. It's your professional duty, I think, to say, yeah, I've been doing that. And why is the evidence saying that? And then when I see that, like the number of green bubbles now, I feel like, oh my God, we have so much. And it before it was like mostly upper extremity. Right now, it's like we have things for everything, for every sort of major functional goal that we know work better. So why are we messing with other stuff? When why aren't we doing that? Because to me, it's like I feel like, boy, when I was starting out, I would have died to have all these different things that I could be doing with my kids.
And I do want to point out that in McIntyre's new article, standing is now green.
Strengthening got in there too. I'm very excited. It took a long time because people weren't doing it right. They started doing it right. It works.
Yeah. Well, that's a good point, isn't it? It's fidelity. So if we are calling it an intervention, it's publishing those protocols and performing it in that sort of way. And I think, for me, something I've noticed is either, I love locomotor training, but I do that in context with overground. That's a really important component of it. Whereas that's often been put together with treadmill training, and treadmill training means so many different things. Is it all facilitated? What was the speed? Was the speed calculated by something that related to that child? And how did we progress it? It's a lack of protocol that means that you kind of put them all together and you water it down.
Yeah. Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And is that another, I suppose, an ingredient of those green light interventions is that things are set out they're manualized, and you can, check your fidelity against them, and you can become accredited in delivering an intervention in that way.
Yes.
And so it's very clear for new therapists and people who, maybe come to learn from you or are trying to teach others. It's very directed and very guided in what they're meant to be doing.
What it actually means. It's kind of what you were saying before, Diane, like about, having courses where you can get some accreditation going, well, I can do constraint or I can do, strength training. It's kind of going, these are the protocols. This is how you can carry it out in that time.
Right.
But that's not controlled at all. Like when I wanted to learn habit and habitile, I went up to Columbia and I stalked Andy. And, I hung out and we became friends. We just wrote a chapter together in Suzanne Campbell's old textbook. But nowadays, if you want to get certified in habit, you've got to go to Belgium and hang out with Yannick for 3 weeks or longer to get certified. So, that's what I think Diane alluded to is we almost have to come up with some international ideas of how we're going to get people up to speed.
Yeah.
Because they're curious. People want to do the right thing. They're motivated. Yeah. Nobody's trying to do harm, but maybe they're not thinking it about the ways that we are in terms of time and money and hope.
Yeah. But I think we like constraint almost constraint means a lot of different things now, but like habitio, as wonderful as that. I mean, obviously that this is a person who's really investigated this principle of doing intensive upper and lower limb training. But do we really have to do habitio? I mean, these are principles that does it have to be called something like we don't feel like we're doing the right thing. Sure. And like we have all these pediatric interventions, these early interventions all have different names. Even the constraint ones will have, apples or different ones. Yeah. Like, I feel like the naming, somehow we've got to stop naming stuff.
Sure.
And just call it, yes, we're going to do intense upper and lower limb training at the same time. And these are some of the ways you can do it.
Yeah.
With lots of crazy balance perturbations that I would never have done before.
I think, but that's great. I think, you push, we know we need to challenge kids more. We need to push things that they're not good at. I mean, there's things that we need to be doing better. What she's learned in her research is critical information, but I don't like the fact that now like I want to take this to Uganda with me.
Yeah.
And say, this is how you're going to do it. I don't want, they can't go like that. We need to make these things totally accessible on a global basis. Like most of the kids with disabilities aren't in Europe and, North America or in Australia. They're other places.
Yeah.
And we need to make these things far more accessible, and principles with suggestions how to implement those principles are really critical.
That's such a good point. And I think that when you think of how complex sometimes we make it, because we're looking for that, I guess that it's the search for that thing to make all the difference. And usually they cost a whole lot of money to either be trained in or to get. And like you said, when we're actually applying all the ingredients of green light interventions, anyone can do it. And those are the principles.
Right.
If you can evaluate that and go, let's just play, let's be as active as we can, let's make sure the child's doing as much as they can, we're going to get outcomes from that that are meaningful for that person, and you can apply them. Yeah.
Right.
And I think we can name the ingredients of the red light things as well. Diane said passive, facilitation, manual movement, reflex integration. I would include moving surfaces, because I think except for really getting on and off an escalator, there's not a lot of moving surfaces going on for my 4s and 5s. So
that's true.
Not functionally relevant.
Yeah.
No,
those are all really good ones.
Yeah. So how confident can we be that we have robust research now? Like, is this a reason contributing to knowledge translation, or that, knowledge to practice gap, that we aren't confident in getting the word out just yet? Like, we need that extra piece of evidence or that extra bit of information? Or do you feel like we are confident that we have robust research and we just need to get it out there and get as many people across it as possible?
I mean, I think the knowledge translation to me is so critical. I mean, I think that's been the missing piece. And that's the piece that we don't get the right message to parents. I actually feel that we need to bypass professionals and go right to parents, inform parents, and have them, they're the best advocates. They can if we can have them understand why people need to be practicing certain ways, they're only going to go to those people. So I feel like I have a lot of confidence in parents. They do, obviously there's a lot of emotional issues and a lot of things, and parents talk to other parents and they get swayed by some things. But I think the more that we can have a coherent message and have that have the good information out there. When parents seek information, they can't get the good information. They get all this other we can cure your child stuff.
Yeah.
So we need to find ways in this knowledge translation to make it easily available, to be the first thing, the first hit that you see. And I'm not that person. I'd like, Ginny's the kind of that. Ginny's great for her age, but I'm just terrible at this. I need my whole young staff tell me how to do this, because I don't know how to do it, but I know it needs to be done.
Yeah. I think the messaging needs to be clear as well. When you were talking about just that we need to get those principles out there, and that's what makes things more accessible, I think, is a clear and simple message. So for families, these are the things you should be looking for in an intervention that your child is doing. These are the principles that your therapist should be adhering to when they're working with your child, and that
can
kind
be
of thing is I don't know what your thoughts are.
And there's always going to be more research. I'm not happy, I'm not happy enough with what we have for CP. I mean, I feel like we've made a lot of incredible gains in how we think about therapy. The F words are just Peter Rosenbaum. Oh my God. He's transformed thinking, which is the hardest thing in the world to do. And that is so amazing. So I think those kind of things, that those messages do somehow get out there, and that's just wonderful, because it's just the right thing. It resonates with everybody. Right. Yeah. But, research is, it's the whole thing about research is we're trying to do better. We're trying to, we're doing neurofeedback. We're doing all kinds of stuff. So it's not going to stop, but I think you need to embrace like everything else, you embrace where you are and fully, and be ready for the next big thing that has evidence. But, if you're not sort of that kind of person going in the evidence path, and you're just sort of stuck in something 50 years ago, you won't be there when these next things happen. You won't be the person to deliver those. So I think that's the kind of thing where I wish people were they would get themselves more on the edge of what we know now, and really embrace things that we know work.
Yeah, I think it comes back to what you were saying at the start of our conversation, Ginny, being confident to embrace the latest evidence, but also being confident to let go of what your ideas or expectations were before that as well. It feels like people kind of wrestle with that line.
It's the Egmar Longo when we spoke to her a few years ago, and I've never, I always remember it. She's like, it's like a dance, Dana. Evidence-based facts like a dance. When the music changes, we change. And as long as we just keep changing, that's it. That's all that is. But we're still dancing, but we just change our rhythm and we just follow the music.
That's more elegant. I love that.
She said it beautifully.
Yeah. And Egmar did her postdoc with Diane, so it all comes full circle.
Yeah. It does.
And Noelle too.
Yeah.
Noelle was with.
Yeah, no, it's
and the last thing I think Diane and I wanted to point out is that sometimes on the internet we're seeing these arguments about the 3 pillars of evidence, being therapists' comfort zone and what our clinical expertise we know to be true, what families' preferences are, and what the evidence states. And again, I wish I was more articulate and could tell you a better story, but they're not equal. If they're equal, the house falls down. Clearly, published evidence is a much bigger pillar. It's probably 3 of the pillars. And then family preference and therapist preference is maybe half of the other pillar.
Yeah, and you can't expect that their preference, family preference, is weighed by what they've heard and what they've been exposed to. And when they listen to therapists so much. Yeah, we did a study looking at where do you get your information, and therapists are way up there, and so it's it's who you're listening to. Yeah,
and we did a study in Spain where we trained everybody on Hein and GMA, and then we went back and said, "What are you doing?" And they were like, "We need more training. We're still going to do all the red-based stuff because that's what we're used to." And so then the answer that Diane and I talk about is, how much training, how much exposure does it take? And it turns out it's a lot. You got to hear things in different ways from different people before you become curious and are like, wow, what is that thing?
Yeah. And the support to apply that training and what you've learned as well.
Right. Absolutely.
There are so many parts to that, but that has been an absolutely inspiring conversation. And I guess you've all kind of just said where to in a little way, but we're always really curious about the where to from here. Have you guys got anything to say about where do you think the industry is headed, or where you're headed from a research perspective that we can wait for and look forward to?
Yeah. So I think this has been a struggle, like when you've watched this for many years, now that I've been doing research for over 30 years, that the uptake of evidence just is not, it's just really hard. And I'm trying to figure out how to solve that. What has changed practice is when we legislate things, and when funding dries up and things like that. We a lot of these things parents pay for themselves, but that's going to limit the access to things, right? I think that our profession needs to be tougher on people. I think insurance companies need to be tougher on people. I think that's going to change behavior, because at the end of the day, it's really about that family in front of us, and they deserve it. They don't deserve people telling them that they should be doing this thing that doesn't work. I mean, so I really feel I wish it didn't have to be that way, and we could leave it to people's own good wills and But I used to think these young people, they're gonna be coming through school and it's gonna change. And I think the young people they do infuse the profession, and it's getting better, but it's not quick enough. And I think if we just told people, well, it's great you want to do that, but you don't get to do it anymore. I mean, that could change overnight. And I actually feel for families, for families, I wish that was done, because I feel like the medical profession doesn't get away with what we get away with. And it's embarrassing to me, because I love my profession and I want it to be incredible, and I want every family to have a great experience. So, so I think unfortunately that's probably the answer.
No, that's
Ginny, do you have any other easier ways to do it besides
care pathways? So Elizabeth Rodby-Basquet in Norway are coming up with care pathways that aren't based on systematic reviews. They're accepting the lower level evidence. And with Eggy Marlongo, one of my groups, we're concentrating on the low and middle income resource areas, trying to come up with train the trainer to try to help folks that don't have access even to physical therapists, especially for the 4s and the 5s. So over the last 2 years, we've published 7 articles on just what to do with the 4s and 5s. But the final thing is, I think Healthy Strides needs to have a certification program. People listen to your podcast series. They have to read all the articles, answer some questions, and then they get a certificate. They are, Healthy Strides certified as informed. I'm loving all the language and the feeding and the OGCOM stuff you're doing, stuff I don't usually learn about. And I'm like, hey, I want a certification because now I know this.
That has come up a few times actually in the last few weeks. So that's why I'm laughing. I'm like, oh, but no, thank you. Thank you so much for that vote of confidence, Ginny. I love it.
and thank you both for, your time today and for sharing so freely your expertise and your thoughts and feelings and everything that we've covered today. We so appreciate your time, and we so appreciate your contributions to this field.
Oh, so good.
Thank you. It was nice to meet both of you. I hope to see you in person someday.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Sure. You're welcome anytime.
Now I'm going to be a new listener. I didn't even know about this, so I'm really
like converted.
No, that's so great.
I'm hoping to join you at the AUCS CPDM next year. So
yes.
I'm hatching
so
a plan.
Oh, good. Very good. Well, we will be there. So we'll see you there for sure.
Yep.
Look, to all of our listeners, remember you can get a hold of our run sheet notes and the links to the papers that we spoke about today on researchworks.net. And also there's a CPD form there that you can fill out as well if you want to keep this as part of a record of your PD requirements. But for now, not that I want to say goodbye, but we need to, because it's late at night for them.
Yes, we need to let them get to bed.
That's right. Thank you to everyone, and we'll talk to you all again next time. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.